The Shimabara Rebellion, the uprising of the forgotten. The silence before the storm. In 1637, Japan lived under the iron peace of the Tokugawa shogunate. It was a peace built on the silence of the oppressed, on the fear that permeated every village, every rice field, every heart that still dared to dream of freedom. In the mountains of Kyushu, where the sea meets the volcanic land, there was a peninsula forgotten by time and prosperity. Its name was Shimabara. There, where golden fields and prosperous families once flourished, only the scar of poverty remained. The soil, exhausted by years of overcultivation to pay impossible taxes, no longer offered sustenance. Children grew weak as reeds in the wind, and the elderly died before seeing another winter. But worst of all was the silence, the deathly silence of a people who had lost hope. No one imagined that from that silence would arise the most powerful roar Japan would hear in decades. The land of hunger and fire. It was the autumn of 1637 when the last grain of rice was delivered to the domain's collectors. Matsukura Katsuie, the daimyo of Shimabara, knew no mercy. His cold eyes calculated only numbers, how much gold he could extract from this cursed land to impress the shogun in Edo. To him, peasants were merely breathing tools, and when one tool broke, he simply replaced it with another. The taxes arrived like a winter storm, sudden, relentless, devastating. Families with barely enough to eat were forced to hand over even the seeds they had saved for the next planting. Those unable to pay faced tortures that would drive demons back. Men were tied to stakes and left in the scorching sun until they confessed where they hid riches they never possessed. Women were forced to watch as their children were dunked in boiling hot springs, but Matsukura's cruelty wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. He knew that many peasants secretly followed Christianity, and he used this as another weapon of terror. Crucifixes were trampled on in public squares, sacred images were burned while entire families were forced to watch, tears frozen with fear streaming down their gaunt faces. It was a kingdom where compassion had died, where justice was but a word whispered in nightmares, and in such a place when all light is extinguished, even the smallest spark can set the world ablaze. The first echoes of the revolt. The first cry came not from a warrior, but from a mother. Her name is lost to history, but her desperation echoed throughout Shimabara. When the gatherers came to collect the last handful of rice that would keep her daughter alive for a few more days, she did not bow. She did not ask for mercy. She simply said no, a word that had not been spoken in that land for years. A desperate mother's no became a village's no, and a village's no spread like flames through the dry forest, reaching every corner of the peninsula. Peasants who had never held anything sharper than a sickle found their hands trembling not from fear, but from rage. Men who had spent their lives hunched over rice paddies straightened their backs and gazed at the horizon with eyes that shone with a new light, the light of rebellion. But it wasn't just the peasants who heard the call. The dusty roads of Kyushu roamed the ronin, masterless samurai, proud warriors who had lost everything when their masters fell from grace or died in battle. These men, accustomed to the gleam of the sword and the weight of honor, now begged for rice and slept in the open air. When the ronin heard of the uprising in Shimabara, they recognized something familiar, the sound of dignity being restored. Masuda Jinbei, a veteran of countless battles, was among the first to arrive. His scars told stories of past glory, but his eyes spoke of a present where only the fight for survival remained. Gradually others joined him, warriors without a cause who found in Shimabara a reason to live or to die with honor. The young man of prophecy. Then the boy appeared. No one knew where Amakusa Shiro Tokisada came from. Some said he arrived from the sea on a misty morning, walking on the waves like the Christ of the occult Christians. Others swore he came down from the mountains, bringing with him the scent of flowers that only grew in paradise. What everyone agreed on was that there was something different about this 16-year-old boy. His eyes possessed the serenity of a deep lake, but also the intensity of a sacred fire. When he spoke, his voice didn't shout. It whispered, but it was a whisper that pierced through crowds and touched hearts like a sharp blade. He said he came in the name of the God of the oppressed, who had descended from the heavens to free the forgotten of the earth. The first time Shiro spoke to the crowd of rioters was on a moonless night under the starry sky of Shimabara. He stood on a rock, small against the vastness of the night, but his presence filled the entire valley. His words flowed like pure spring water. "My brothers, how long will we bow our backs beneath the weight of injustice? How long will we offer our tears as tribute to those who despise us? They say we are but peasants, mere dust beneath the feet of the mighty. But I tell you, we are children of the same sky that covers the castles of the daimyo. The same sun that warms the gold of the lords warms our hearts. And in these hearts burns a flame that no sword can extinguish, the flame of freedom." As he spoke, Shiro raised a flag he had made with his own hands. It was white as the pure snow on the mountains, and in the center shone a black cross, a symbol of faith, but also of resistance. "Under this flag," he said, "we will not fight just for rice or land. We will fight for the right to exist, for the right to worship our God, for the right to die as free men." The crowd erupted in cheers that echoed across the mountains. Some wept, others laughed. All felt something had changed forever. The boy who had seemed so fragile had become the beating heart of the rebellion. The March of the Desperate. With Shiro as spiritual leader and the Ronin directing military strategy, the rebellion took shape and direction. They were no longer just angry peasants. They had become an army. A strange army, it was true. Children marched alongside elders. Women wielded improvised spears. Buddhist monks fought side by side with fervent Christians. But there was something about them that the shogunate's well-trained samurai lacked: the absolute certainty that they had nothing to lose. Masuda Jinbei, the veteran Ronin, organized the men into combat formations. He taught them that courage could compensate for lack of technique, that determination could overcome fear. For weeks, the sound of war drums echoed through the valleys of Shimabara as the rebels prepared for what they knew would be a fight for survival. The first victories came quickly. Small detachments of samurai from the domain were surprised by the ferocity of the attacks. Men who had never wielded a sword discovered they could fight with the fury of caged lions when finally freed. Smaller castles were taken, rice stores looted and distributed among the starving. But everyone knew these were only initial victories. The true test would come when the shogunate awoke from its slumber and sent its legions to crush the rebellion. Shiro knew this, and so he made a decision that would determine the fate of the revolt. They needed a stronghold, a place where they could hold out until the whole world knew of their struggle. The Castle of the Sacred Ruins. Hara Castle had been abandoned decades earlier, its walls partially destroyed by earthquakes and typhoons. It stood on a rocky promontory overlooking the sea, like a broken tooth in the jaw of the coast. To the eyes of the powerful, it was nothing more than useless ruins, but to Shiro's eyes it was perfect. "Here," he said as he gazed at the crumbling walls, "we will build not just a fortress of stone, but a fortress of faith. These ruins that the world has despised will become the symbol of the resurrection of the forgotten." Work began immediately. Men, women, and children worked day and night to restore what they could of the fortifications. Where stone was lacking, they used wood. Where wood was lacking, they used earth and hope. They dug trenches around the castle, built palisades, and set traps for the samurai's horses. But Hara Castle became more than a military fortress. It became a holy city. Within its makeshift walls, the rebels created a different world. There were no nobles or commoners, only brothers united by the same cause. The conquered rice was divided equally. The wounded were cared for by all. Children played while adults stood guard. Shiro established a daily prayer routine where Christians, Buddhists, and even Shinto followers would gather to ask the heavens for protection. His message was simple. God sees no difference between the prayers that rise from golden temples and those that arise from the hearts of the humble. Our voices, united, reach the ears of the Most High with more force than the bronze bells of wealthy monasteries. Weeks passed, and Hara Castle became a beacon of hope for all the oppressed of Japan. Messengers came secretly from other provinces, bringing news that the flames of rebellion were spreading. In Edo, it was said, the shogun himself had lost sleep, worried about the revolt that was growing like a storm in the south. But Shiro knew the approaching storm would be even greater. From the sea, he watched the dark clouds gather on the horizon. They weren't rain clouds, they were war clouds. The Dragon's Wrath. When news of the Shimabara Rebellion reached Edo, Shogun Tokugawa Iemitsu felt a fury he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just anger, it was terror. Terror that this small flame could set all of Japan ablaze, that other peasants in other provinces would discover they too could say no to their lords. "Crush them," he ordered his war council, his voice chilling the blood of those present. "Crush them so that for 100 generations no peasant will dare even breathe a word of protest." The shogunate's war machine sprang into motion with the deadly precision of a blade being drawn. Orders came from every province. Send your best samurai, your sharpest weapons, your most ruthless generals. Within weeks, an army of over 100,000 men was heading for Shimabara, a force that could conquer entire countries, sent to crush a handful of rebellious peasants. The chosen commander was Matsudaira Nobutsuna, a man whose cruelty was legendary even among the hardiest samurai. His eyes were like bottomless wells, and his sword had drunk the blood of countless enemies of the shogunate. When he accepted the mission, he made only one comment: "When I'm finished, not even the stones of Shimabara will remember that there was once a rebellion there." But it wasn't just an army that headed for Shimabara. It was an avalanche of iron and hatred. Cannons were transported by sea, war horses descended from the mountains like galloping demons, archers, for the first time in Japanese history, were ordered to take no prisoners. It was as if all the accumulated fury of 300 years of samurai rule had found a target where it could be unleashed without limit. When the first sails of warships appeared on the Shimabara horizon, even the children at Hara Castle stopped playing. The sea, which for weeks had been their protector, now filled with vessels bringing death. The ground shook under the weight of thousands of approaching horses. The sky darkened with the smoke from the campfires of an army that stretched farther than the eye could see. Shiro climbed the castle's highest tower and gazed upon the force coming to destroy them. For a moment he seemed nothing more than a frightened boy faced with the impossible, but then he raised his white flag with the black cross, and his voice rose above the din of the approaching war. "Let them come. Have you brought swords? We have faith. Have you brought cannons? We have courage. Have you brought death? We are certain that our cause is just, and a just cause, my brothers, is mightier than all the armies of the earth." The Siege of 1,000 Demons. The siege began at sunrise in January 1638. It wasn't an attack, it was a ritual extermination. The shogunate's cannons roared like dragons awakened from a 1,000-year slumber, shattering entire sections of Hara's walls. Arrows fell like black rain, and the air filled with the deadly whistle of musket balls. But the rebels resisted in a way that defied all military logic. Where a wall fell, they erected a barricade of bodies. Where arrows were lacking, they threw stones. Where gunpowder was lacking, they used the sacred fire that burned in their hearts. Women fought side by side with men, children carried ammunition for the defenders, and elders offered their last strength to keep the walls standing. Masuda Jinbei, the veteran Ronin, proved to be a brilliant strategist. He knew all the samurai tactics because he had been one of them. He anticipated attacks and organized sudden counterattacks that inflicted unexpected casualties on the besieging army. "They outnumber us," he told the defenders, "but we outnumber them in reasons to fight. They fight for gold and glory. We fight for our souls." During the day, the castle was a hell of iron and fire. But at night, when the cannons fell silent and only the wails of the wounded echoed through the ruins, Shiro walked among the defenders like an angel of consolation. His hands healed wounds that medicine could not reach, wounds of the soul. His voice whispered promises of a paradise where there would be no more hunger, no more pain, no more tyranny. "Do not fear death," he said, because the death of a righteous man is only the birth of a martyr. And martyrs, my brothers, never truly die. They live forever in the memory of those who continue the fight. The weeks dragged on like years. Kyushu's normally mild winter seemed to transform into a frozen demon, blowing through the gaps in the destroyed walls. But neither cold, nor hunger, nor despair could break the defenders' spirit. Each morning they saw the sun rise was a victory against the forces that sought to extinguish its light. Matsudaira Nobutsuna, the siege commander, felt a frustration that consumed his gut like acid. How could starving peasants resist the most powerful force in Japan? His generals whispered that perhaps dark magic was involved, that the boy leader of the rebels had made a pact with foreign demons. "Magic or not," he growled, "I will burn that castle to the ground until there is nothing left. And when I am finished, I will sprinkle salt on the earth so that not a single flower will grow again where they dared to defy the shogunate." The Iron Cross and the Faith of Fire. The religious dimension of the rebellion grew more intense as the siege dragged on. For many advocates, this was not just a battle for social justice. It was a holy war, an Armageddon where the forces of light confronted the darkness of tyranny. Within the besieged castle, secret Christians could finally profess their faith openly. Crosses were erected on the walls like war banners. Prayers were chanted before each battle, not whispered in secret, but shouted for the heavens to hear. Shiro had become not just a military leader, but a prophet who promised that God would judge between the oppressors and the oppressed. "You see how they hate us," he said, pointing to the besieging army, "not only because we dare to ask for rice for our children, but because we dare to worship the God of love instead of the gods of war. They want to force us to step on the cross, but I tell you, it is better to die standing worshipping the true God than to live on your knees worshipping tyranny." Strange stories began to circulate among the defenders. They said that during the fiercest battles, angels had been seen fighting alongside the rebels, that musket balls turned into flowers when they struck the most devout, that Christ himself had appeared to Shiro in a vision, promising that all who died for the cause of justice would be immediately received into paradise. True or false, these stories instilled in the defenders a courage that transcended humanity. They fought as if they were already immortal, as if death were merely a gateway to an even greater victory. On the besieging side, the religious dimension of the rebellion caused growing unease. Many samurai raised in the Buddhist and Shinto traditions felt a strange unease fighting against people who prayed so devoutly. Some began to whisper that perhaps the gods were on the side of the oppressed, which was why victory had been so slow in coming. Matsudaira Nobutsuna, realizing that his troops' morale was being eroded, ordered Buddhist monks to bless the besieging army's weapons. "If they use their religion as a weapon," he declared, "we will use ours as a shield." The hunger that devours hope. As the months passed, the siege's most cruel weapon proved not to be cannons or swords. It was hunger. The same hunger that had ignited the rebellion now returned to destroy it from within. The supplies captured in the initial attacks had long since been exhausted. Not another grain of rice reached the castle, not a drop of clean water, not a single piece of fish from the waters now teeming with enemy ships. The children, who weeks before had played among the barricades, now lay silent in the arms of mothers who had no milk to offer. The elders, proud warriors who had wielded spears with trembling but determined hands, were withering like extinguished candles. Even the most resilient Ronin felt their strength slipping away like sand through their fingers. Shiro saw the suffering of his people and felt a pain that transcended the physical. Sometimes in the early morning hours, when he thought no one was watching, tears would silently run down his young face. But when the sun rose, there he was again, radiant and serene, distributing the little food he had saved for himself to the hungriest. "The hunger of the body is terrible," he said, "but the hunger of the soul is far worse. And our souls, my brothers, are more nourished than ever. They feed on justice, on freedom, on the love we have for one another. This food will never run out." But the stark reality was that bodies needed rice, not just inspiring words. They began eating leather, roots, anything that would fool their stomachs for a few hours. Some went so far as to eat the grass that grew between the stones of the walls. Then something no one expected happened. Instead of breaking the defenders' spirit, the extreme hunger seemed to purify them even further, as if, stripped of everything material, only the pure essence of their cause remained. Men who had once wept in pain now smiled serenely. Women who had lost children to famine sang lullabies to the remaining orphans. "You see," Shiro whispered in one of his last public prayers, "how God prepares us for paradise? He is stripping us of all earthly attachments so that we can soar higher when our time comes." The last dawn. The dawn of April 12, 1638, dawned differently over Hara Castle. The air was quieter, as if the wind itself were holding its breath. The shogunate's cannons had fallen silent during the night, and a strange peace descended upon the battlefield that for months had known only violence. Matsudaira Nobutsuna knew that this would be the final day. His spies had confirmed it. There were only a handful of capable defenders left. Hunger had played its grim role. It was time for the coup de grace. Inside the castle, Shiro gathered his closest companions for the last time. They numbered fewer than 200 men, women and children, all that remained of the thousands who had followed his banner. But there was no defeat in their eyes. There was a strange, almost supernatural light, as if they had already seen something the others could not. "Today," Shiro said, his voice still carrying all the serenity of the early days, "today we complete our journey. We began as slaves crying for rice, and we end as free men who have proven to the world that dignity cannot be bought or sold, conquered or destroyed." He raised for the last time the white flag with the black cross, now torn by bullets and stained with the blood of martyrs, but still waving proudly on the makeshift flagpole. "Weep not for us when we fall," he continued. "Weep for those who remain, for those who will continue to bow under the yoke of tyranny. We are going to a place where there is no more hunger, no more pain, no more fear. But our story, our struggle, our courage, these will be forever engraved in the heart of the world." The final assault began at noon. Thousands of samurai rushed the ruined walls like a human avalanche. The defenders, too weak to wield heavy swords, fought with stones, nails, and their bare fists. Every inch of the castle was contested as if it was sacred territory. Shiro fought to the end, not with weapons but with his presence. Wherever he appeared, the defenders found the strength for another blow, another resistance, another cry of defiance. When he finally fell, pierced by 3 spears simultaneously, he still had a serene smile on his lips, as if he saw paradise opening to receive him. The silence after the storm. As the final battle cry echoed through the ruins of Hara Castle, a deathly silence descended upon Shimabara. It was a different silence from the one that existed before the rebellion, not the silence of fear, but the silence of utter devastation. Matsudaira Nobutsuna walked along the destroyed walls with the grim satisfaction of duty fulfilled. More than 37,000 bodies lay scattered throughout the castle and its surroundings, men, women, children, all killed without distinction. There were no prisoners, no mercy, not even the courtesy of a proper burial. Amakusa Shiro's head was cut off and sent to Edo as a trophy. The shogun displayed it at the palace entrance as a warning to anyone who dared question his authority. But even in death, the young leader's face retained that strange serenity, as if still smiling toward a future only he could see. The ruins of Hara Castle were completely razed. Every stone was removed, every beam burned, every trace of resistance erased from the face of the earth. The soil itself was salted so that nothing would grow there for generations. It was as if the shogunate wanted to erase not only the rebels, but the very memory that they had ever existed. The scars on the heart of Japan. The shogunate's victory at Shimabara was complete, but it left scars that never fully healed. The cost of the operation had been astronomical. Over 100,000 men mobilized, the resources of dozens of domains exhausted, months of war to crush a handful of starving peasants. To many it seemed too disproportionate, too cruel, too unnecessary. Tokugawa Iemitsu, however, considered every gold coin spent a necessary investment. "Let everyone know," he declared to his council, "that this is the price of disobedience. Let everyone see what happens when one dares to defy the natural order of things. For 300 years there will be no more rebellions in Japan." And so it was. The measures taken after Shimabara were draconian even by the standards of the time. Christianity was not only banned, but persecuted with a systematic fury that made the European Inquisition look mild. Any object suspected of Christian origin was destroyed. Anyone suspected of Christian sympathies was tortured until they confessed or died. More than that, Japan closed itself off from the outside world like a wounded oyster closing itself in its shell. Sakoku, total isolation, was implemented with the rigidity of natural law. No Japanese could leave the country. No foreigner could enter. No outside idea could penetrate the sacred borders of the empire. "Shimabara taught us," said one of the shogun's advisors, "that foreign influences are like poisonous seeds. Planted in Japanese soil, they grow like weeds that suffocate our traditional culture. Better for Japan to be a closed garden, pure and unsullied, than an open field contaminated by dangerous ideas." For more than 200 years, Japan would live in this self-imposed isolation, like an enchanted kingdom that had stopped in time to avoid contamination from the outside world. The echoes that never die. But not all the shogunite's fury could completely erase Shimabara's memory. In lullabies whispered by courageous mothers, in stories told by the fire on winter nights, in secret prayers murmured in hidden temples, the name of Amakusa Shiro lived on. The hidden Christians, the Kakure Kirishitan, made the young martyr an unofficial saint. Images of him were hidden inside Buddhist statues. His prayers were disguised as traditional sutras, and his memory was preserved like embers, hidden beneath seemingly dead ashes. For them, Shiro had not died. He had merely passed to a higher plane of existence from where he continued to inspire and protect the oppressed. Even among those who were never Christians, the story of the rebellion took on legendary proportions. Shiro became the symbol of all who dared to dream of freedom in an age of absolute tyranny. Underground poets composed verses about the castle that defied the world. Secret artists painted pictures of the white flag fluttering against the stormy sky. In Shimabara, where the very land had been cursed with the salt of vengeance, strange flowers began to bloom a few decades later. Locals said they were Shiro's tears transformed into petals, blooming to remind the world that not even death could completely silence the voice of justice. Travelers passing through the region swore on windy nights they heard the distant echo of voices singing hymns of freedom. Fishermen reported seeing, in the waters where the shogunate's warships once anchored, a strange light that flickered like a fallen star. The eternal legacy of the forgotten. More than 200 years passed before Japan opened its doors to the world again. When it finally did, in the mid-19th century, much had changed. The outside world had transformed into something the isolationists of 1638 could never have imagined. Steam engines, telegraphs, ships that moved without wind, weapons that killed from miles away. But one thing remained exactly the same: the human spirit that refuses to accept injustice as immutable destiny. When the first Westerners returned to Japan and heard the story of the Shimabara Rebellion, they were struck not only by the rebels' courage, but also by the modernity of their demands. Those 17th century peasants had fought for concepts that the world was only beginning to rediscover in the 19th century: basic human rights, religious freedom, and a government that serves the people rather than oppresses them. Shiro Amakusa, the 16-year-old boy who defied an empire, was gradually recognized not only as a religious martyr, but as one of the first defenders of human rights in Japanese history. His white flag with the black cross had flown not only over the ruins of Hara, but over the dreams of freedom of all humanity. The ultimate irony of Shimabara's story may be this: the shogunate managed to crush the rebellion, but it failed to crush the idea it represented. Each generation of Japanese rediscovered in its own way that human dignity is an inalienable right, that no government has the divine right to crush its people, that sometimes it is necessary to die standing so that others may live free. When the time finally came for the Meiji Restoration and the shogunate itself was overthrown, many saw it not just as a political shift, but as a belated vindication of the ideals for which Shiro and his companions had died. The Japan that emerged from the isolationist era was no longer the closed kingdom Tokugawa had envisioned, but a nation that gradually learned to value the rights of all its citizens. Today, where Hara Castle once stood, there stands a small memorial. It's not as grand as the monuments to shoguns or daimyo. It's just a simple stone with an inscription that reads, "Here fought and died those who dared to dream of freedom." But this simple stone receives more visitors than many imperial mausoleums. People come from all over the world to pay homage to those anonymous peasants who proved that the human spirit is stronger than all swords, more enduring than all empires, more powerful than all tyranny. And when the wind blows hard over Shimabara, visitors swear they can still hear, echoing through the centuries, the last battle cry of the forgotten, a promise that wherever in the world there is oppression, there will always be someone willing to raise a flag and say no in the name of human dignity. Thus ends the story of the Shimabara Rebellion, not with the defeat of those who fought, but with the eternal victory of all they fought for. For there are truths no sword can cut, ideals no fire can burn, hopes no tyranny can extinguish. Hara Castle has fallen, but its memory lives on. And as long as there are human beings on the face of the earth, there will be those who remember the forgotten people of Shimabara and the 16-year-old boy who taught the world that even the humblest can touch the sky when they fight for a just cause.